after 42 years and 4 months in prison, one of the longest times served in U.S. history in what is known to be a wrongful conviction. Today, Kevin Strickland went free.
Being imprisoned for a crime you didn't commit is everyone's deepest fear. But when the truth is finally revealed, emotions run wild. Here are 10 reactions of innocent convicts who are finally set free. Number 1. Daniel Villegas. The mood was heated in the El Paso County Courthouse in Texas as the trial of 41-year-old Daniel Villegas came to a close. Villegas was accused of taking the life of 2 teenagers in 1993 while he was only 16 years old. He said that at the time of his original confession, he was pressured by an El Paso investigator and was denied legal representation. Despite subsequently retracting the confession, it was critical evidence for the prosecution. Villegas had undergone 3 successive trials for the same crime, each time insisting on his innocence. The first trial in 1994 was called off owing to a deadlocked jury. A retrial in 1995 resulted in a capital conviction and a life sentence. However, after 18 years in jail, the decision was reversed in 2013 owing to incompetent aid of counsel, resulting in Villegas' release in January 2014. He was released on bail and raised 2 children while awaiting a 3rd trial. The prosecution maintained Villegas' guilt throughout the court process. Nonetheless, there was no DNA, forensic evidence, or weapon linking him to the shooting. Villegas stood before the judge and jury seconds away from knowing whether he would be able to return home to his family or spend the rest of his life behind bars. The presiding juror stated the verdict, which increased the tension in the courtroom. Villegas stood nervously, facing the potential of yet another life-altering result. The jury had been deliberating for a while, and their decision could make or break his life. A collective applause erupted from supporters in the courtroom as the decision was read. Daniel Villegas was found not guilty, a watershed moment in his life that was the first time he stood free since he was 16 years old. The judge addressed Villegas, thanking him for his patience during the trial. With the not guilty decision, he was free of any restraints, free to exit the courtroom and begin again. The weight of his wrongful conviction had been lifted, allowing him to restore his life. Number 2. John Bunn. John Bunn, a strong guy who underwent a tortuous 27-year struggle, is a witness to the serious effects of wrong convictions. His narrative, tarnished by injustice, began when he was 14 years old in New York. The heavy hand of the law stretched out and seized him at this early age, putting in motion a chain of events that would rob his childhood and forever change his fate. Detective Louis Scarcella of the New York City Police Department was the primary factor behind Bunn's arrest and subsequent wrong conviction. John Bunn was wrongfully convicted of taking a life in 1991. This grave miscarriage of justice led to Bunn enduring an agonizing journey, spending more than 16 years behind bars and nearly 12 years on parole. But after over 3 decades of unshakable tenacity and steadfast trust in his own innocence, the truth finally began to emerge. Bunn's conviction, which had cost him his freedom and damaged his reputation, was reversed. The discovery of Detective Scarcella's misbehavior, combined with the terrible realization that there was no probable reason to arrest Bunn in the first place, revealed the enormity of the injustice done to him. As the shackles of false allegations were finally lifted, John Bunn had a bittersweet moment in court. As he stood before the court, an implicit acknowledgement of the priceless years robbed from him remained in the air. Despite this, he kept his head held high, a living tribute to the tenacious human spirit that refuses to be broken even in the darkest of circumstances. Bunn launched a legal struggle after his release to seek justice for the pain he had undergone for so long. He filed a lawsuit against the city of New York and Detective Scarcella, holding them responsible for the pain and suffering they caused an innocent man. This legal effort was more than simply a desire for restitution. It was an attempt to shed attention on institutional faults. Upon regaining his freedom, Bunn transformed his harrowing experience into a powerful catalyst for positive change. He embarked on a mission to make a profound impact on the lives of incarcerated youth by founding a non-profit organization. The primary aim of this non-profit is to provide education to young individuals behind bars and foster a love for reading by granting them access to books that promote literacy. Number 3. Richard Jones. Richard Jones is a black man whose life was turned upside down after he was wrongly convicted of a crime he did not commit. He grew up in Kansas City, Kansas in the late 1970s and had a rather average upbringing. Richard was recognized as a pleasant and law-abiding young man who was fully committed to his neighborhood and family life. His life, however, took a sudden and unfair turn in 1999 when he was accused of a horrible crime, a robbery that resulted in the shooting of a lady in the Kansas City region. Despite asserting his innocence from the very start, Richard was subjected to a highly dubious identification procedure in which a witness identified him as the offender based on a weak memory. Richard Jones was convicted and sentenced to 19 years in jail in a trial that would change the trajectory of his life. The conviction was devastating for him and his family, who knew he was innocent. The absence of substantial proof linking him to the crime exacerbated his predicament. Richard, however, maintained his innocence throughout his term, diligently seeking to vindicate his name. Inside the confines of the jail, he grappled with the harsh reality of life as a falsely convicted man, wrestling with thoughts of despair and a longing for justice. His days were distinguished by repeated appeals, the dogged search for new evidence, and a fervent hope that the truth would eventually be revealed. After 17 years in prison, Richard Jones received the news he had long hoped for. He was going to be freed. New evidence had surfaced indicating a case of mistaken identification. Another individual who resembled Richard had been discovered as the genuine perpetrator. This suspect had a criminal past and was in the area at the time of the incident, but his involvement was ignored during the first inquiry. A flood of emotions washed over Richard as he received the news of his approaching release. His senses were flooded with relief, delight, and amazement. He had spent years battling for his freedom and reputation after being wrongfully imprisoned, and finally, the day he had hoped for had arrived. Number 4. Kristen Lobato. Kristen Lobato's story is a terrible one of a young lady imprisoned for 16 years for a crime she did not commit. She was accused of brutally taking the life of a homeless man in Las Vegas when she was only 18 years old. She was first convicted, but the charges were lowered to voluntary manslaughter on retrial, and she was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Lobato maintained her innocence during her years in jail, insisting that she had nothing to do with the crime. Her pleadings, however, were unheard, and she faced the agony of being falsely condemned, separated from her family, and robbed of her youth. It wasn't until a fresh hearing was scheduled that a ray of optimism finally appeared. Evidence emerged confirming that the crime occurred when Lobato was 3 hours away with her family. This essential piece of evidence established that she could not have been there at the crime site. After years of fighting for innocence, Kristen Lobato's innocence was ultimately established and she was exonerated. Kristen Lobato went outdoors as a free woman for the first time in 16 years on the day of her release. Her face was filled with an incredible combination of feelings, including excitement, thankfulness, and happiness. The burden of unlawful imprisonment had been lifted, and she had been reunited with her family. The fight for justice, however, did not end there. Lobato sued the Las Vegas Police Department, demanding restitution for the injustice she had experienced. The ongoing compensation claim aimed to compensate her for the years taken from her life, the mental agony she underwent, and the irreparable harm caused by the erroneous conviction. Kristen Lobato's story shows the criminal justice system's major faults. A young woman's life was irreversibly damaged by a mistaken conviction, and she spent her adolescence in prison for a crime she didn't commit. But now the burden of unlawful imprisonment has been lifted and she has been reunited with her family. Number 5. Kevin Strickland. Kevin Strickland felt this day would never arrive after experiencing one of the longest wrongful conviction cases in U.S. history. Kevin Strickland had been waiting for this day, his exoneration, for 43 years. He was jailed in 1972 at the age of 22 when the state of Missouri accused him of taking the lives of 3 people. Kevin maintained his innocence from the start, but the odds were stacked against him. Despite the fact that there were no direct statements tying Strickland to the deaths and that two of the real shooters, Vincent Bell and Kilmer Adkins, admitted under testimony that Strickland had no role in the crimes, he was still convicted. The case's manipulation and corruption were obvious from the very start. Kevin Strickland suffered repeated denials of retrials over the course of 43 years, a trend all too prevalent in wrongful conviction cases. However, in 2015, a ray of hope appeared when the prosecution received an email with vital evidence, a witness's recantation. And despite the fact that the witness had already passed away, her recantation was well documented and believable, bringing new insight into the case. The team led by Jackson County prosecutor Gene Peters Baker and the Midwest Innocence Project worked relentlessly to liberate Strickland using this new evidence. But fighting against the exact individuals who had thrown him behind bars in the first place was a difficult task. Even with the prosecutor on their side, the procedure was extremely challenging. It took months and months, but they ultimately got Kevin Strickland back home. He had finally gained his freedom and all he wanted to do was visit his mother, and yet even then there were challenges. Attorney General Eric Schmidt caused delays, and Strickland's one last wish of seeing his mother before she passed away was denied. His mother died 2 months later, and his petition was further delayed and dismissed due to bureaucratic obstacles. However, Missourians and others opted to aid in another way. A GoFundMe campaign garnered more than $1.7 million to help Strickland rebuild his life. It didn't make up for the 43 years he had lost, but it gave him some stability and solace after his unfair imprisonment. Kevin Strickland, now a free man, fantasizes about simple pleasures like walking to the beach, feeling the force of the ocean, and marveling at the expanse of the open seas. He appreciates every second of his newfound freedom after having 43 years taken from him and is eager to make the most of his life outside the prison walls. Number 6. Nancy Smith. Nancy Smith, a bus driver for the Lorain County Head Start program in Lorain County, Ohio, had her life turned upside down in 1993. Everything appeared to be normal until her employer called with surprising accusations. Nancy was accused by a mother of not sending her kid to school and of attacking her. Nancy was perplexed and she had no memory of any such encounter and had never met the woman making these allegations. Nancy and her lover Joseph Allen were facing a serious prosecution when the nightmare began. Nancy saw that the children's stories were altering as she read the trial transcripts and police reports. Her naive faith in the legal system had been crushed, and Nancy and Joseph were condemned to 15 years in jail for a crime they strenuously denied committing, notwithstanding her cries of innocence.
First of all, I would like to thank God for giving me the strength and the patience He was standing for me.
Nancy was troubled by the prospect of leaving her children behind. From the outset, the case appeared strange. Nancy said she had never seen Joseph previously, casting doubt on the charges leveled against them. Margaret Groden, the mother of the small girl involved, was the driving force behind this experience. Margaret not only implicated Nancy, but also went to considerable measures to ensure her imprisonment, even threatening neighboring parents with jail time if they refused to assist. Margaret's purpose appeared to be financial gain, since the bus company was sued and the parents involved received millions of dollars. The trial was fraught with inequity. Nancy recalls parents and police officials pointing towards Joseph during the lineup, thus influencing the selections of the young witnesses. It was clear that certain people were prepared to go to any length for selfish gain, disregarding the truth and ruining the life of an innocent woman. However, Nancy refused to give up hope despite her conviction. In 2009, she appeared before Lorain County Common Pleas Judge James Burge, a judge noted for his fair morality. Judge Burge overturned the verdict due to an unforeseen technicality. The initial paper condemning her was not correctly filled out. Nancy's clemency wishes had come true and she was finally free. Nancy burst into tears and the courtroom was filled with weeping supporters. The agony she had felt over the years was tremendous. While she was out of prison, the humiliation and pain of her erroneous conviction would follow her forever. Nancy addressed the court, describing how the false claims had devastated her and her family. Nancy and her family were apologized to by Judge Burge for the wrongful prosecution that had deprived them of decades of their lives. But despite her release, the scars of her erroneous conviction would never entirely heal. The deep emotions expressed in the courtroom revealed the true cost of the injustice. Number 7. Ricky Jackson. Ricky Jackson's life took a sad turn when he, Wiley, and Ronnie Bridgman were falsely convicted of robbing and taking the life of Harold Franks in 1974. Despite having been supported by defense witnesses, their conviction was founded on a 13-year-old boy's fraudulent eyewitness evidence. He was given capital punishment, which was subsequently reduced to life in prison without the possibility of release, ushering in a long and agonizing path to exoneration. Ricky Jackson would go on to serve 39 years in jail, the most time in prison before being exonerated.
I mean, you sit in prison for so long, you think about this day.
His agony dwarfed that of any other falsely convicted individual. Only in 2011 did Cleveland Scene magazine shed light on the anomalies that eventually led to Ricky's exoneration with his co-defendants. The Ohio Innocence Project's reinvestigation uncovered critical evidence after nearly 4 decades of battling for justice from inside prison walls. The police had pressured the little kid into giving false evidence, and when he tried to retract his identification of the 3 defendants, that information was never provided to their defense counsel. The identification of this serious wrongdoing resulted in a breakthrough in the case. Judge Richard McMonigal approved Ricky and Wiley Bridgman's pleas for a fresh trial in November 2014, vacating their convictions. The prosecution subsequently dropped all allegations against them, and the other individual involved, Ricky, and his co-defendants were eventually released after nearly 40 years of unlawful imprisonment. Ricky Jackson's emotional reaction to his exoneration was nothing short of joy. After years of striving for the truth to be recognized, he was overcome with a delight at finally being recognized as an innocent man. It was a long-awaited moment of redemption that renewed his faith in the power of endurance and the battle for justice. Ricky celebrated his sudden release surrounded by family members who had never given up hope. The cries and hugs were heartfelt emotions of both sadness for the years he spent behind bars and enormous appreciation to everyone who helped make his exoneration possible. While physically reintegrating into society after decades in jail faced hurdles, Ricky discovered that for all 3 guys things went far more smoothly than imagined. They began to rebuild their lives and appreciate their newfound freedom with the help of loved ones and organizations campaigning for justice. Number 8. Clifford Williams. Clifford Williams Jr., a man who had been wrongfully convicted for 42 years, and his nephew Nathan Myers were ultimately exonerated. The tipping point occurred when prosecutors in Duval County turned in a report from the Conviction Integrity Unit, which revealed a lack of evidence supporting their guilt. Despite having 40 witnesses testifying to their innocence, both men were wrongfully prosecuted and guilty of murder in 1976. The terrible occurrence occurred after Jeanette Williams passed away, and her spouse, Nina Marshall, identified the offenders as Clifford Williams Jr. and Nathan Myers. Crucial physical evidence, however, suggested that the rounds were fired from outside through a bedroom window. Regrettably, the defense counsel ignored this critical information during the trial, resulting in an unjust conviction. The 2 men should have been exonerated when 40 witnesses testified in their favor, but instead they were wrongfully convicted and condemned to capital punishment. Despite the harshness of the punishment, Judge Cliff Shepard later overturned it, citing a lack of supporting evidence presented in court. This watershed event acted as a striking tribute to the belief that justice may triumph despite all circumstances, giving hope to numerous people who face similar jail releases in the future. Clifford Williams Jr. was overcome with emotion when he learned of his impending release. After more than 4 decades in prison, tears flowed down his cheeks as he took in the news. The burden of his unfair imprisonment was removed, and he hugged those who had stood with him during his long and difficult journey. The profound significance of freedom struck a deep chord within him, a witness to the actual value of liberty when it is taken away unfairly. Clifford Williams Jr.'s faith remained unwavering during his unjust detention. He battled relentlessly for his rights and innocence, demonstrating unshakable perseverance even in the darkest of circumstances. His steadfast attitude will continue to inspire and empower others going through similar experiences, acting as a light of hope for those seeking justice and the righting of wrongs through the judicial system. Number 9. Luis Vargas. Luis Vargas, a man whose life was cruelly shattered by a false conviction for 3 attacks, fought for more than a decade to be heard. Tragically, he was sentenced to 55 years in prison for crimes he did not commit, launching a 16-year legal fight. However, justice would ultimately begin to be served when the California Innocence Project took up his case and fought for DNA evidence testing.
Now test for DNA evidence that you can't even see by the naked eye.
This crucial step resulted in his conviction being overturned by a court as the victim's identification during police lineups pointed to another suspect. Between 1999 and 2002, Vargas filed multiple appeals seeking release from the wrong verdict. However, the road to exoneration was fraught with bureaucratic stumbling blocks, and several of his requests for court review were denied without a thorough examination of the new evidence. His story demonstrates the uphill fight that people face when trying to overturn guilty verdicts, emphasizing the critical need for reforms to simplify the process and guarantee that fresh information is carefully evaluated. Vargas's story sheds light on the importance of DNA evidence in the pursuit of justice. Testing the DNA from the victim's clothing revealed that Vargas was not the criminal, further proving his innocence. This result emphasizes the need to test DNA evidence in criminal cases as soon as possible, since it can hold the key to proving the truth and exonerating the falsely convicted. Vargas's exoneration became a reality in 2019 after years of battling false charges. It's difficult to understand how relieved and grateful he must have felt upon receiving the news. His lips quivered and tears streamed freely, bearing testimony to the flood of emotions rushing through him. He was finally free of the shackles of an erroneous conviction. The reunion with his beloved family after the long travel was both emotional and joyful. They had remained by his side throughout the years of hardship, supporting him through setback after setback. They shared a meal together, a simple act with tremendous significance, symbolizing the restoration of routine and the celebration of fresh optimism. Number 10. Deborah Mielke. Deborah Jean Mielke, born March 10, 1964, is a German-American whose life was turned upside down when she was charged for the death of a 4-year-old son, Christopher Conan Mielke, on December 2, 1989, in Arizona. Her flatmate James Lynn Stiers and his buddy Roger Mark Scott were also accused of being complicit in the crime. Despite the fact that both Stiers and Scott testified that Mielke wasn't there during the shooting, Scott accused her of being the mastermind while Stiers denied any participation. The shooter's exact identity has remained a mystery to this day. Mielke's conviction became a point of contention over time, owing primarily to the actions and testimony of Phoenix police investigator Armando Saldate, who claimed that Mielke confessed to the crime. However, there was no evidence to back up this accusation, and Mielke angrily denied ever making such a remark. And Saldate was later charged with perjury, putting more doubt on the credibility of his evidence. The issue of whether or not Mielke willingly surrendered her Miranda rights, as well as Saldate's history of wrongdoing and the prosecution's unwillingness to release his employment record, were essential to Mielke's appeals. In March 2013, a 3-judge panel on the United States Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously reversed Deborah Mielke's conviction. The judges were severe in their criticism of the defective procedures that led to her unjust conviction. Following the judgment, Mielke was freed on a $250,000 bail, thanks to the intervention of Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Rosa. Despite the Arizona Attorney General Office's announcement that it intends to retry Mielke and seek the capital sentence for her crime, the state's highest court banned the scheduled retrial. Finally, on March 23, 2015, Judge Mrose finally dropped all allegations against Deborah Mielke with prejudice. Mielke came out of jail finally free after more than 25 years of wrongful imprisonment. She left the court without speaking to reporters. The enormous delight of regaining her freedom was surely coupled with the terrible grief of all the lost years and pain she had undergone. And Deborah Mielke took an important step towards finding justice for her unjust conviction in 2015 when she filed a civil action in federal court against the city of Phoenix, Maricopa County, Bill Montgomery, and Armando Saldate. During her legal struggle, Mielke was allegedly exposed to malicious prosecution and denied a fair trial according to the lawsuit. However, the road to justice proved difficult with years of legal wrangling over the discovery process. Despite Milky's best efforts, the case encountered obstacles and difficulties that dragged it out, and finally in 2020, a federal court issued a definitive judgment dismissing the claim, thereby ending the legal drive for redress through civil action.